At long last, we're making our video on the false swipe gaming icon itself, Aegislash, the Pokemon combining shield and sword. Eat your heart out, Zacian and Zamazenta. Aegislash is menacing in design and name alike, the latter combining Zeus's shield Aegis with the terrifying slash of Michael Myers. Its design also draws inspiration from mythical European swords like the famous Excalibur. It's not just a shield and sword either, it's a possessed shield and sword. Today we're going to be examining the more visceral impacts Aegislash may or may not have had in the sword-slicing ruthlessness of the competitive scene. And so we ask, how great was Aegislash actually? But first, not only are we doing FSG's original mascot today, we've also got some new merch to go along with it. In honor of the false swipe name, get your 1 HP shirts today. Be honest, I know you guys can hear the sound of the red bar just by looking at this. It's also what happens to a Pokemon you use false swipe on. And that's not all, we also have hoodies and shirts with the FSG logo on them, as well as stickers and a Switch case. So if you want to support the channel and also get some cool merch, check the merch links below the video to purchase them. And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. From the minute Generation 6 came into being, Aegislash was one of the new OU metagame's most hilariously broken Pokemon. Yes, even in those early stages that had the monstrosities like Deoxys and Mega Kangaskhan running around, its typing was the stuff of legend, an absolutely perfect combination that had been theorized and desired for years previously. It had been sought after for its defensive capabilities, but in Generation 6, its stab combination was also offensively terrifying in ways it wouldn't have been before. Ghost was excellent stab with Steel no longer resisting it, and the most popular dark type, Tyranitar, wouldn't want to come near Aegislash for fear of Steel Stab, or its fighting coverage Sacred Sword. Steel Stab was also much better than it had been before, as it was now a super effective weapon against excellent new fairy types. Aegislash had 2 forms it switched back and forth between in battle. The way it bounced between the forms was referred to as the Stance Dance. It started out in its shield form, which was focused on defense, with enormous base 150 defenses, which were so huge Aegislash's rather middling HP stat didn't feel middling at all. The shield form had a paltry base 50 in both offenses. However, as soon as Aegislash attacked, as in used a damaging offensive move, not something like Toxic or Swords Dance or Substitute, it would switch to its shield form focused on offense. Its defenses would drop to an awful base 50, but remember that thing about shield form having low offenses? Yeah, that would never actually matter, since Aegislash attacking meant it was always in its sword form, and its sword form meant it was hitting the opponent with equally enormous base 150 offenses. This is the same as Rayquaza. Furthermore, if Aegislash wanted to switch back into shield form without switching out, that was no problem, as it did so by using King's Shield, which was a form of Protect. Aegislash's incredible bulk and typing allowed it approximately a million switch-in opportunities from which it would fire off its prodigious offenses. And what's more, the whole Stance Dance dynamic was essentially always in Aegislash's favor. Wasn't it vulnerable when it attacked though? That's the thing. Aegislash was slow, and this was good for it, because it meant it would take your hit first so easily in shield form, then it'd attack you in sword form, so it had the best of both worlds. You couldn't hit it when it was vulnerable on the first turn or on the next turn, because on the next turn, it would safely revert back to shield form with its King's Shield. It had the dex stacked in its favor to ridiculous proportions. Oh, and King's Shield was more than just Protect. Okay, it wasn't an exact clone since it didn't stop moves like Status or Leech Seed, but that was just fine. It didn't just stop direct damage. Its advantage over Protect was that if you use a contact move into King's Shield, it would give you -2 attack. Yeah, have fun trying to Flare Blitz or knock off Aegislash with that. So much for weaknesses. Aegislash's peerless blend of offense and defense made it not just one of the most dominant Pokemon around, but one that was easily used on every type of team, and with a huge variety in sets, making taking it on even more difficult. It usually went with its standard attacking set with leftovers or occasionally Spell Tag, using Shadow Ball alongside a combination of King's Shield, Sacred Sword, Iron Head, and Shadow Sneak, because yeah, it also had stat priority as another way to compensate for its low speed. However, it also could run Pursuit, as it was an incredibly hard stop to the Laddie twins and could trap them for the benefit of its terrifying teammates Keldeo and Mega Charizard Y. Oh, you wanted to stall such Aegislash sets with something like specially defensive Talonflame or Hippowdon? Meet Substitute Toxic Aegislash, which utterly ruined these and managed to wring even more infuriating use out of King's Shield. Of course, Swords Dance Aegislash was a fierce late-game cleaner, sometimes using Air Balloon to remove its Earthquake weakness and tear through the many grounds trying to take it on. It could pull off just about anything. How did one deal with Aegislash? It was incredibly difficult. Its bulk was truly ludicrous. With just max HP investment that was standard on most sets, it lived absolutely absurd super effective hits like Life Orb, Mammoth and Earthquake. Spamming King's Shield to regain its defenses also came with the side benefit of grabbing as much leftovers recovery as possible. A tried and true tactic that meant its lack of immediate healing didn't mean it didn't have incredible longevity. Nah, Aegislash stuck around. It was incredibly difficult to take advantage of because even if you somehow predicted King's Shield, Aegislash would still be back in its unkillable shield form, and then it was ready to mess you up again. Offensive teams were too fragile to take its hits, and there wasn't much it couldn't adapt its move pool to destroy on the defensive side. Using Aegislash was basically riskless. It was too good against pretty much everything. What was particularly fascinating was the way that Aegislash was the perfect example of new toy syndrome, or current generation blindness. It was a Pokemon that was clearly broken and warping the metagame to an unhealthy degree, yet in the tradition of other newly introduced monsters like Diamond and Pearl Garchomp or Black and White 2 Genesect, Aegislash had hordes of players passionately defending its place in the tier. It was an easy claim to make that this was a new Pokemon and everyone just needed to figure out how to deal with it, how to adapt to it. It's not like this was a Deoxys Speed type Pokemon, which kept getting tested and doing the same broken thing over and over. Cool idea in theory, but it couldn't overshadow that everything about Aegislash was absurd, with the inherent nigh risklessness of its stance dynamic, which effectively meant it was a Pokemon with a base stat total of 720. Does that number sound familiar? Well, it might, because that's the same base stat total as Arceus. Despite this, there was no shortage of attempted downplaying of Aegislash's traits. The King's Shield dynamic, which was overwhelmingly in Aegislash's favor, nah. Shadow Ball is only 80 base power, and so it's not that strong. Forget its spam ability. From Aegislash's million opportunities to the lack of resist to its Kyogre tier special attack. These kinds of arguments were so many that when Aegislash's suspect test finally came around, there was tension in the air. Many top players felt that if Aegislash remained in the tier, it would perpetually twist everything around it to the degree that there'd be little hope the rest of the generation could salvage a balanced metagame. And this was a real concern given how many of the masses loved their new Shield and Sword toy. The numbers came in, and those desiring a competitive metagame exhaled a massive sigh of relief as Aegislash wound up banned, breathing new life into a tier no longer restricted by its massive warping effect. It was briefly retested some months into ORAS, which many considered to be a mistake and a waste of time, but fortunately, it wasn't re-allowed into the metagame, even though the tier was stronger now. Aegislash was one of X and Y's most overwhelming defining monsters. And of course, Aegislash naturally found a home in Ubers, where it was quite good. Its greatest role was that of an incredibly solid Xerneas answer, being able to resist a +2 Fairy Aura Moonblast and respond with a powerful Gyro Ball in return. It was also effective at spreading Toxic onto would-be switch-ins like Yveltal, Ho-Oh, Kyogre, and Groudon, both base in XY and Primal in ORAS. In the latter metagame, it was also quite a solid answer to the Soldew Laddie twins. Its general bulk meant it could also take many big hits in a pinch, allowing its team leeway into big threats ranging from Arceus forms to Mega Salamence. It was a bit on the passive side and notably competed with Klefki, which also provided spikes, but Aegislash had greater longevity thanks to King's Shield, and thus fit on many successful balance teams in Generation 6 Ubers. Aegislash was absolutely incredible in VGC for the same reasons as singles. Its typing paired with the stance dance dynamic, allowing it to excel on defense and offense simultaneously, made it one of the most elite Pokemon in the format, spamming its Shadow Ball into just about everything, pairing with Sacred Sword for perfect 2-move coverage that destroyed the likes of Pokemon which took on Shadow Ball like Bisharp, Tyranitar, and Mega Kangaskhan. In ways, it was even better suited to the double-centric metagame. Earthquake was a spread move in this format, so it hit Aegislash less hard, while it also packed in immunity to Fake Out, and its version of Protect could be more directly ruinous to opposing physical attackers like the aforementioned Mega Kangaskhan. In fact, Aegislash was so well suited to doubles, it could even be EV to live Mega Charizard-wise spread Heat Wave in the sun. In addition to the ever-reliable leftovers, Aegislash could also run Weakness Policy, the perfect item to take advantage of its ability to withstand super effective hits, able to withstand something as strong as Mega Mawile Sucker Punch. It would get double attack and special attack for doing so, and that substantial boost to its already amazing power allowed it to slice through the opponent swiftly even by VGC's already fast-paced standards. However, Leftovers was the more consistent option, maximizing Aegislash's hit-taking capability, especially in conjunction with King's Shield, and even more so since one of Aegislash's favorite moves was Substitute to take advantage of opposing protects and sucker punches, as well as teammates like Mega Kangaskhan's fake outs. Consistency on Aegislash was crucial since it was so good, so nigh flawless, that it was considered the most important non-Mega Pokemon around. It then follows that it was everywhere in 2014. It was pretty much impossible to stop, as long as you had a team that could handle the likes of Mega Charizard Y, as an example of one of the few Pokemon capable of truly scaring it, and something you should have had in general anyway, then Aegislash would consistently put in work. It was so popular, so integral to so many players' success, that we're not even going to try to come close to naming all of its placements prior to Worlds. Similar to a Landorus or a Heatran type of Pokemon, using Aegislash wasn't special. It was a standard and expected part of winning. We'll instead mention all the top 1 placements, where Aegislash was part of a tournament-winning team. Ray Rizzle won the Massachusetts Regional with a minus speed nature, 0 speed IV Aegislash, meant to underspeed opposing Aegislash. The purest example of how important Aegislash's low speed was to the game. A Japanese player named C used Aegislash to win the Asia Cup. The 3rd place player in the Asia Cup, Bicho, also used Aegislash to win the Japanese qualifier, utilizing its excellent synergy alongside Salamence. Sapphire Birch and Zog both used Aegislash en route to winning grassroots tournaments in New York and Manchester respectively. Trainer Nathan won the Melbourne Regionals with Aegislash in the senior division, while in Auckland, Trainer Bronson won Masters and Trainer Troy won Seniors. Oliver Rayleigh won the Pokemon Battle Tournament UK with Aegislash. Anthony Jimenez used Aegislash's superb synergy alongside Hydreigon to win the Nugget Bridge Major. At the US Nationals, Mackenzie Carrazos used Aegislash to win Seniors, and Alex Agosla won Masters. We'll also mention certain Top Cut players with unique uses of Aegislash. Jackson Daughtery used a nearly non-existent Swords Dance Aegislash to reach top 4 at the Southern California Regionals. J Rank used a weakness policy Hidden Power Ice Aegislash to reach 9th at the Kansas City Regional. Finally, both Adib Alam and Pat Ball regularly used Lumberry Aegislash, compensating for King Shield's lack of protection against status. Adib reached 2nd at the US Nationals with it, and Pat used it throughout the season. Aegislash actually wound up winning at Worlds in the junior division, used successfully by Kota Yamamoto. It also came in 2nd in that division by London Swan. It was also runner-up and 3rd place in seniors, used by Mark McQuillan and Eric Rios respectively. Finally, Aegislash saw plenty of uses in Masters, most notably coming in 3rd and 6th with Colin Hare and Miguel Martin de la Torre respectively. Post-Worlds tournaments for the 2015 season using 2014 rules continued to see Aegislash used unsurprisingly. Most notably, Wolf Glick reached 2nd at the Philadelphia Regionals, Baz Anderson won the Nugget Bridge Invitational, Nelson Lim won the Elite Four Challenge in Singapore, Dimitrios Kagaras reached 3rd at the San Jose Regionals, and Octavian won the Oraz opening tournament. With that monster of a 2014 behind us, we move on to 2015. Power creep and new competition from other steals like Heatran and Mega Metagross ensured Aegislash wasn't quite as incredible, though it still was nothing less than amazing, of course. Now commonly sweeping under Trick Room, we limited its placements to top 2s accordingly. These players on screen all reached 1st and 2nd with it, and as you can see, there are many. Matthew Rowe and Matthew B both won at the Australian Nationals in the Masters and Seniors division respectively. Marcus Statter and Arash Omadi came in 1st and 2nd at the US Nationals. Toller Webb won the US Nationals, and Aegislash was quite prominent at Worlds again. It most notably reached 2nd and 3rd with Hideyuki Taida and Yosuke Isagi respectively. Additionally, Michael Shropshire top cut St. Louis Regionals using an unusual safety goggles Aegislash, letting it counter Amoonguss' Spore and Rage Powder, while Light Core used a substitute toxic Aegislash to reach top 8 at Lancaster. 2016's absurd primal-centric unrestricted metagame meant Aegislash was just about non-existent, unfortunately. Jamie Boyd did, however, use it to win the Liverpool Regionals, using a creative power anklet strengthened gyro ball set that allowed it to utterly destroy Xerneas. Furthermore, his set was bulked out to almost always survive Primal Groudon's Precipice Blades, or even Eruption when his partner Mega Rayquaza's Airlock or Delta Stream would block the sunlight. Props to Jamie for succeeding with it, especially since his team also had a Cottony on it. So all in all, despite its scarcity in 2016, Aegislash's first 2 years were so dominant, it was still one of the best VGC Pokemon of Generation 6. Despite the protests of many who bore fresh memories of the wounds Aegislash had inflicted during its reign of terror in Generation 6, Generation 7 began with the Shield and Sword Pokemon allowed in OU again. It wasn't expected to last, just a cursory formality to remove any trace of doubt that this beast would become more palatable in the face of power creep. And that expectation was completely correct, as Aegislash was just about immediately banned, since its power on both sides of the offensive-defensive spectrum was still downright obscene. It was still effectively a 720 base stat total Pokemon with perfect typing, capable of withstanding hits and dishing them out in equal measure, with the methods or dealing with it so limited that often you'd be playing overwhelmingly into the Aegislash user's hand. Oh, as if that wasn't enough, Aegislash can now boost its own power with Z Crystals. Yup, just as it was referring to its boosted Shadow Ball, Never Ending Nightmare would have also been an accurate summation of what Gen 7 OU would have been had Aegislash been allowed to continue in the tier. As such, it was among the first waves of bans in the initial days of Sun and Moon. Aegislash wasn't quite as useful in Ubers this time around though. Its Xerneas checking role was eclipsed by Magearna, which was a vastly superior Pokemon overall, with Necrozma Duskmane outclassing it as well when Ultra Sun and Moon came out. With the newly Tapu-centric VGC metagame, Aegislash found itself a force in VGC once again in 2018. It particularly enjoyed the presence of Tapu Bulu's health recovering and earthquake weakening grassy terrain. It could also take advantage of misty and psychic terrains with their respective seeds, which boosted its special defense and made it just about unkillable on the special side, allowing it to fully unleash its offensive terror. Furthermore, with Ghostium Z, it had the potential for huge bursts of damage without needing to withstand a weakness policy activating super effective attack. Finally, Aegislash could also become newly lethal by boosting its speed with Automize, letting it act as an efficient sweeper. Focus Sash variants were also seen occasionally, allowing Aegislash to play much more aggressively and catch opponents off guard. As if that wasn't enough to deal with already, Aegislash was superb and fittingly quite popular, so we've limited its pre-Worlds placements to top 4. These players on screen did very well in VGC for this year. Finally at Worlds, Ashton Cox brought Aegislash yet again and finished 19th. Ryosuke Kosuke and Stefan Mia brought Aegislash coming in 35th and 38th respectively. Aegislash was more limited in the various 2019 metagames, though the 95% usage rate of Incineroar, not a restricted Pokemon, was actually its biggest problem, and also the preference for Mega Gengar as a ghost thanks to its amazing speed. But it was still a decent choice, taking on Xerneas and Duskmane Necrozma. Using Aegislash, Gabriel Ogati reached 6th at the Buenos Aires special event, Giovanni Polanco reached 2nd at the Antigua Cuscatlan special event, and the 2nd Leah Libertad special event. Javier Signorena reached 16th at the European Internationals, Juan C. Ortiz reached 2nd at the Guayaquil special event, Joshua Lorsi reached 17th at the Hartford Regionals, Ryan Losetto reached top 16 at the Atlantic City Regionals, and finally Christopher Kahn was the most successful of all, winning the Sydney Regionals. So overall, Generation 7 was another successful one for Aegislash in VGC as well. Game Freak finally realized how hilariously overpowered they made Aegislash all those years ago, because in an unprecedented move, they made it the first Pokemon to receive nerfs to its base stats. A few Pokemon have received base stat boosts in newer generations, but never before had a case like Aegislash has been seen. Its base 150s in both Shield and Blade form were now lowered to base 140. Still amazing stats, of course, but no longer nearly as outrageous. That's not all either. King Shield now only lowered forward attack by one stage if the opponent used a contact move into it. Now, Game Freak did compensate Aegislash quite decently for its trouble, gifting it a superb fighting type coverage upgrade in the form of close combat, but it wasn't going to be the same unstoppable monster it had been before. The player base was excited for Aegislash's return to OU. Surely it wouldn't be broken this time around, right? Having actively been made worse, and that was very much the case, as Aegislash was no longer quite as immovable defensively and didn't quite slam through everything offensively. Early Sword and Shield had a slow-paced, bulky style to it, and with the popularity and dominance of Hippowdon, Toxapex, Mandibuzz, Ferrothorn, and Corviknight, Aegislash was quite well contained. This is not to say it wasn't a threat, of course, and it could break through nearly anything if played well enough. If you think Specs Dragapult's timid nature base 100 special attack Shadow Ball was scary, and it was, since it was incredibly spammable and could not be punished by Pursuit thanks to the latter's removal from the game, then Aegislash with its modest base 140 special attack Specs Shadow Balls, forget checking it with otherwise decent answers to more standard Aegislash sets of the past, such as Rotom Heat, Seismitoad, and Excadrill. Additionally, Aegislash gained a pseudo explosion in the form of the recoil heavy but insanely powerful Steel Beam. Aegislash's first foray into choice items wasn't just limited to Specs either. Choice banned Aegislash would utterly obliterate Ferrothorn switch-ins with a brutal close combat, while also blasting through High Dragon and even dealing heavy damage to Como-O, who was Shadow Ball immune thanks to its bulletproof ability. Close combat was so strong, it was less a coverage move and almost like a third stab. At long last, Aegislash was a superb OU Pokemon without strangling the metagame with its brokenness, and then the Isle of Armor DLC came around in a metagame newly dominated by Urshifu's Single Strike, whose unstoppable Wicked Blow ripped through everything, very much including Aegislash, with Aegislash not even being able to weaken Urshifu with King's Shield thanks to the Unseen Fist ability ripping through protection moves. Furthermore, the addition of subsequent dominance of Volcarona and Libero Cinderace didn't help Aegislash either. It was still quite a good OU Pokemon, but it was no longer elite as it had been. Yes, that's right, Aegislash was headed to UU. Wait, what? That seems like a stretch. It was definitely confusing, considering Aegislash was still a popular, effective OU Pokemon, but that's exactly what happened. Pokemon tiering can be bizarre sometimes. Aegislash would always retain a place in OU over the course of the generation, although it became less and less popular as Dragapult revealed the full extent of its near brokenness, but it was still solid. Now Aegislash in UU. Does that sound like a recipe for destruction? Indeed it does, and that's exactly what happened. With the metagame's much lower power level, as well as being overruled by Pokemon Aegislash utterly dominated like Noivern and Sylveon, Aegislash completely took over the metagame. Its only check was Incineroar, a good check for sure, but Incineroar also had to be wary of close combat. This was an incredibly unhealthy dynamic, and thus Aegislash didn't even last a week in the UU metagame, quickly getting banned to UUBL. This would have been well enough, but as mentioned previously, Aegislash was still an effective choice in OU, going from a top 10 Pokemon to say top 15. It still dominated defensive staples Clefable and Corviknight with incredible ease, and its stabs were still far from pleasant to switch into, with Shadow Ball switches like Mandibuzz and Blissey being susceptible to Ruination from Toxic and Close Combat respectively. The Crown Tundra came around and unleashed an enormous torrent of power creep on OU. Previously, Aegislash's stat reductions had been less noticeable with the limited Pokedex, but it really couldn't be missed now that it was again facing off against past tier mainstays like Heatran and Landorus T. It also had new Ghost-type competition in the even more powerful Blacephalon, which itself dropped to UU, and that's where Aegislash wound up as well. Its return to the tier wasn't as dramatic as it had been previously, considering it was sharing the metagame with several other obscene Pokemon who were absolutely crushing the tier, such as Volcarona, Victini, Tapu Lele, Terrakion, Gyarados, and another powerful Ghost-type, Gengar. It was still an excellent Pokemon, of course, and it didn't take long before the player base noticed how questionable its presence was. Thus, about a month in, it was put up for a suspect alongside Gengar, Terrakion, Gyarados, and Volcarona, but Aegislash found itself not receiving the quick ban hammer. Players were still wary of Aegislash in the tier and believed that the time would come for it to be re-examined. For now though, Aegislash continued to excel in even this more powerful version of UU. Its defense into offense playstyle being as powerful as ever with how many switch-in opportunities it got and the strength of the moves it then unleashed. Then another month later, Galarian, Zapdos, and Blaziken dropped into the tier and were immediately put up for a suspect. And this time, Aegislash got banned alongside Galarian and Zapdos. That wasn't the end of Aegislash's Gen 8 UU story either. The previously chaotic metagame wound up settling a few months later, with many of its soft checks like Galarian Galarian Moltres, Como-O, Nidoqueen, Tangrowth, and Mamoswine being excellent and prominent in the tier. Thus, it seemed reasonable to account for Aegislash, and thus it was returned to the tier, staying for quite some time. It was one of the best Pokemon, of course, as it was a UU Aegislash after all, but beyond the aforementioned Pokemon, it also struggled with common threats Rotom Heat, Zarude, and Crocodile. Nevertheless, its substitute toxic sets, as well as the all-out attackers with either Spell Tag or Choice Specs, were superb tier-shaping forces. Fast forward about a year, and the tier had changed naturally thanks to bans as well as metagame optimization, and the latter in particular made it clear that maybe, actually, probably, there was something just a little bit goofy about Aegislash and UU, specifically the way it had several excellent sets and how the answers to these sets were so vastly different. Sure, sub-toxic Aegislash was answered well by Galarian Moltres or Zarude, but both were smacked around something fierce by Choice Band. The Choice Bander was handled by Mandibuzz pretty decently anyway, but sub-toxic throttled it, and Specs could make it quite uncomfortable too. Chansey took on Specs and was decent against sub-toxic, but again, Choice Band or even worse, Swords Dance. Switching Chansey into SD Aegislash just ensured it'd be getting +4 attack instead of +2. This dynamic was considered unhealthy, imagine that, and Aegislash received another suspect test, but managed to avoid the ban hammer thanks to the prominence of good offensive checks to it in Hydreigon, Diggersby, Zarude, and Excadrill. However, it wasn't long after this that sub-toxic Aegislash completely took over high-level tournament play. The ban of Galarian Moltres helped out a lot in this regard, and it was discovered that even with jungle healing, Zarude could actually lose to a well-played Aegislash one-on-one. If this, seemingly the most perfect counter in existence, wasn't a sufficient answer, then what was? Well, nothing. Thus, Aegislash wound up getting suspect tested again, a whopping 4th time, and finally the player base had had enough, and with an overwhelming percentage voting to ban it, Aegislash's Generation 8 ended in spectacular fashion. Aegislash's stat slash pretty much ended its VGC career too. It was no longer able to take hits and dish them out as well as it needed to, and thus saw just about no usage. Its placements were very nearly nihil. And that's it. So how great was Aegislash actually? Well, the answer, of course, is downright incredible. It absolutely crushed OU in its first 2 generations of existence, with every attribute it had contributing to its brokenness. Its perfect typing, its 2 forms it fluidly slipped between that combined to effectively give it a base stat total of 720, and that was with a low speed stat. A low speed stat which incidentally worked to its benefit. It was even good in Ubers in its first generation. Here's how great Aegislash really was. In Generation 8, it was the first Pokemon ever to have its stats nerfed. You know how busted you have to be for even Game Freak to go, yeah, we might have gone too far in a few places. Utterly insane. Aegislash was a perfect choice to make that piece of history. It was still a good OU Pokemon in Generation 8, but hilariously dropped to UU, which it was suspect tested in a whopping total of 4 times, getting banned on 2 different occasions. And of course, Aegislash was an incredible Pokemon in VGC before it got nerfed in Gen 8. So all in all, Aegislash was an absolutely incredible Pokemon, and we can't see it being any less than superb if and when it returns. That is, unless Game Freak feels the need to slash his stats some more, of course. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about Aegislash? Was the nerf deserving? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.